Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association, Antitrust Law section. My name is John Roberti, and today's topic is what's bias got to do with it? A discussion with jury experts on how to plan for, identify, and address jury bias. In antitrust cases, by the time cases get to trial, the stakes are huge, and any advantage, any disadvantage, any issue that you fail to account for could be the difference between success and disaster. Today we're going to talk about an issue that is really important, but I think that antitrust lawyers don't think about, at least consciously, until it's right out in front of them, and that's jury bias. We have some experts today that are going to talk about how you should be thinking about this issue, not just when you show up in the courtroom and start picking a jury, but really throughout your case. My co-host today is Jaclyn Phillips. Hi, Jaclyn.
Hey, John.
Jaclyn, what are we doing today?
So today we have Hillard and Christina Ouska from JuryScope. JuryScope is a litigation consulting firm that assists trial teams with all aspects of trial preparation, from analyzing mock juror research to developing trial strategies and choosing jurors. Jo is the president of JuryScope and has vast experience concerning all aspects of trial preparation. She's been involved in hundreds of cases in state and federal venues nationwide. Christina is a senior trial consultant and has a background in business and legal education and has a wealth of knowledge concerning juries, including conducting juror interviews and selecting juries. So, hi, Jo and Christina.
Good morning.
Good morning. So you both are going to walk us through a very important issue, like John said, and tell us about how trial teams can and should prepare for, recognize, and navigate issues of juror bias. But first, this is a pretty big topic, and we can only cover a small portion of it in our short time today. So can you set the stage by explaining what we mean when we say juror bias for the purposes of our talk today?
Yeah, I mean, juror bias, it's a two-direction street. So it's not only how the attorneys are picking their jury and going through the jury selection process, which is absolutely another important topic to consider so that we make sure that we are picking our jurors in a fair and responsible manner. But for purposes of today, it's really talking about when you have a group of people listening to your case, how do those people filter and process the information, and what biases are they bringing to the courtroom that could potentially impact that case? And ultimately getting to trial, as we know with antitrust cases, it's months and months and months, sometimes years and years and years. So ultimately leaving it to 8 individuals on a federal panel. You need to make sure that you are thinking about that very early on.
Absolutely, and years has definitely been my experience. Bias can mean a lot of things, obviously. So when we say bias today, what kinds of biases are we talking about?
Right. So I think an important thing to think of first is, where do these biases come from and how do they originate? We get about 11 million bits of information per second, and our conscious brain can only handle about 40 to 50 bits. And that's everything from the lighting in the room, to the temperature in the room, to hearing noise outside in the hallway, to your phone ringing, to your watch buzzing, whatever it is, your brain can only handle about 40 to 50 things. And so it makes these shortcuts. And that is where our biases come in, because sometimes the shortcut has a negative effect. And so when we talk about it in regard to a jury trial, it can be everything from gender of the team to race of a witness, sexual orientation. It can even be, where is the company that you're defending based out of?
You know, it's interesting because, a lot of lawyers think jury consultants are kind of like wizards, like Doctor Strange, where, you come in and there is just an element of this that you know how to do that we don't. A lot of us have heard about implicit bias, and, we've had training from our employers about our own implicit biases. But I think it's interesting to think about it coming the other way. Like, how do you deal with somebody who's going to make a really important decision for your client and they have their own priors or, things that will influence them.
Right. They definitely come in with their own array of stereotypes. And I don't want you to think we're not wizards, so we're just going to leave that one out there. But I think it's just really important to make sure that when you're talking to that group of people, and we can get into this in a little bit more detail, but you're using a variety of communication efforts. You are taking into consideration where the heck in the country am I? Who is sitting over here with me on my trial team? Who is my client? What potential issues are there that could play into that dynamic? But you're absolutely right.
It's expanding the peripheral vision of the lawyers way beyond, I think, what we're used to. We're used to looking at the cases and the law and the facts and thinking about how are we going to present that. But this is an entirely new set of variables.
Yeah, and I think in preparation for today, Christina and I were talking about just the number of stories that we have seen in trial and in mock trials where bias has come into play. And I think it's easiest to think of bias just in terms of race and gender. I mean, that's obviously, those are the two sort of easiest buttons to find when discussing the topics. But as Christina said, there are so many different aspects to bias and so many different ways that it could come in. But we have seen everything from, I was doing, and I want to avoid giving the city here because I don't want you to not like people from those cities. But because we've definitely seen comments being made in the most populated metropolitan area to the most rural mock exercise or trial that we are doing. I was doing a mock trial, and one of the witnesses was Egyptian. The witness wasn't even showing up there in person. It was just a video. And we were going through a discussion about, okay, so what did you think of the witnesses? And this one woman raised her hand and she said, "I'm sorry, I can't believe anyone from the Middle East." And everyone in the room sort of collectively sucked the oxygen as she said that. She just freely said this in the room. And she said, well, she gave this sort of bizarre anecdote how she had a neighbor who she didn't feel like was trustworthy, who happened to be from somewhere. And it was first and foremost, it was surprising that she was willing to just put that out there so directly. But at the same time, she was. And you could also see what the other thing that's informative is the reaction of everyone else, which wasn't, oh, she's being really honest and she's being really open with her biases so that we can make a decision about this information. It was, you shouldn't be saying that, which gets into a whole bunch of issues with jury selection, which again is that other topic of how do we pick our juries in a fair way. But you just have to be aware you might have some jurors that just come in with those biases. And we could spend all day on these. I know, Christina, you had another one that you've seen recently.
Well, and I think just to piggyback off of that, I mean, that would be an explicit bias that we would very easily be able to find during the jury selection process. When we're talking about implicit bias, it's something that we aren't even aware that we're carrying. There's a Harvard implicit bias test that you can take so that you can better gauge your own biases, and they've really expanded it. So it's everything from skin tone to gender and careers, gender and science. So that's just a little plug for the Harvard implicit bias test, even though I have no
affiliation.
I have no affiliation, but I do think it's really informative of your own biases. But yes, we've had other cases. I was working with a trial team, and they were talking about the makeup of their trial team because that's something you need to consider when you're going into trial. And they said, we decided in our last trial that we had an all-male trial team, and so we should put a woman on our team. So they put a senior partner on with them, and she sat at counsel table every day, and she did not have an active role. And at the conclusion of trial, they were able to talk to the jurors, and they said, why was the partner's wife sitting at trial every day? Because they didn't understand what her role was, and clearly that token representation was very ineffective.
Well, and there's the bias coming through, right? There's the bias coming through. Oh, there's a woman at the table. That must be the wife.
Right.
Not
exactly.
The assumption there.
Not that that's an advisor who just doesn't have a speaking role. Oh, that's the wife.
Right.
And that's the bit that terrifies us, I think, because how do I control for that?
Right. Well, and oftentimes you can't control for that. But one of the most important things that we talk to trial teams about, because we so often get the question about 2 weeks before trial.
Right.
Who do we bring on to make this look more diverse?
No, and that's the wizard point, right?
Yes.
We're about to do.
How can you fix this?
Yeah, exactly. We're about to do a jury questionnaire. Help.
Right.
What questions do I need to ask? Right. And
Exactly. And so when you get that question at the last minute, those individuals often can't play an active role because they're frankly just not prepared. And you will hear from jurors this idea of pandering or tokenism. Literally just this last month had a case in a very metropolitan area where because of some nuances of who the defendant was in the case, we couldn't introduce in-house counsel as our corporate representative. So Asian woman sat through trial, was introduced as an attorney, but never took a role. And the jurors actually said in their post-trial comments, did you just have her here to make us feel like it was a more diverse group? And it was already a decently diverse group. But because we couldn't introduce her as the corporate representative, that was the automatic assumption. And so whenever we're talking to trial teams, it's, let's get ready early. Let's not wait for 2 weeks before. Let's make sure we're thinking about diversity very early on.
Yeah. So what other types of issues? I mean, I know that you probably get a lot of trial teams who come to you, like John said, right before and say, help us now. What are other ways that trial teams can start thinking about this way early in the case? Like just when we start building our facts, like it sounds like this should be something that we're considering as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's thinking of who your trial team is first and foremost, and also looking at and thinking as a group, where are potential issues and areas where well-known biases may come into play. Are you an all-white male trial team? Well, maybe there is going to be some bias there that you don't have a diverse team. There is the way jurors are informed about the legal process, because so many of them are wildly unfamiliar with it. Maybe they've been to small claims court. Maybe they've gone through a divorce themselves. They're mostly informed by the media about what a legal team may look like. So they won't necessarily have an expectation that your team will be diverse, but they will definitely appreciate a more diverse team, especially in areas of the country that are more diverse. So I'm not saying that it has to, if it doesn't make sense because of expertise in the area, whoever brought the client in, that it has to be an extremely diverse team.
But a lot of it goes into just this idea of when you're putting your team together to make sure, number one, you're considering ability and knowledge. You want to make sure, obviously, you are putting the best skill set on the team, separate and apart from what anyone's gender, race, et cetera, might be. So, but provided you can take those things into consideration and you have that pool of people putting together a team, there's been so many studies about the amazing advantages of having that diverse trial team. And I'm going to have Christina talk about that. But before I turn it over to her on that topic, the other thing that we'll get is witnesses, is should we just have this person in there? But as I said, jurors will see through that tokenism, that what they see as pandering. So when you have a witness come into the room, our first question to the trial team is, well, what role do they have in the case? I mean, do they actually have something to say about the facts of this case? And if the answer is no, then let's find someone else, even if they might not fit our ideal addition to the diversity of that team. But yeah, that there's been so much research out there on what a diverse team will bring to the case. And again, we can also look at this as the advantage of having a diverse jury over there, but just in terms of the team itself. Christina, you were just reading an article on this recently.
Yeah, I mean, there have been, like Joe said, there's been so much research about how much more effective a diverse team is. They make fewer factual errors. And obviously, all of these are extremely beneficial to trial teams. They have more innovative solutions to problems, and they also tend to be able to step back from a case and really analyze what are our strengths, but more importantly, what are our weaknesses. And it stops you from getting so close to your case that you can't view it objectively.
It's interesting, and I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's interesting because we're hearing that not just on effective trials, but also on effective compliance, right?
Yes.
We did a podcast a while ago called "Why Are All the Price Fixers Dudes?" and part of what we were looking at was and sort of our thesis on that podcast, or the guest's thesis anyway, was, look, if you have a diverse group of compliance professionals, if you have a diverse board, you're getting these different ideas, you're getting different thoughts, you're getting people who are going to be speaking up and saying, wait, no, that's not consistent with our values. So we're hearing about that there. But it's interesting that we're hearing that it's important to be effective, but also important for the people that are ultimately going to judge.
Right, decide your case.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
in fact, there was a New York Times article years ago that said that diverse juries actually similarly make fewer factual errors. And, the author of the article also posited that perhaps, their convictions would be less likely to be overturned.
Well, and I think one of the things that diversity brings to a team, and one of the things that we are always cautioning trial teams on, Jaclyn, you brought up so what should trial teams be doing? And one of those things is, as you get closer to trial, as you're coming up with your messaging and how you're going to communicate this, a diverse team is likely to provide more of a check on that presentation. So you want to make sure, as simple as not saying ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I think most of us have been trained to say members of the jury, but it's important. And then when you get into the presentation of the material, making sure that you're not using cultural or historical references that just may be really offensive to one group or another. Making sure that you're not just relying on the tried and true, that you're really testing yourself. Is this the best way to communicate? Are we talking to, if you want to talk about diversity of age within a jury pool, you're going to be talking to people from anyone from 18 to 70. Not everyone's going to receive information in the same way. So making sure you're varying your presentation modes. You're doing what they call change-ups between maybe using a PowerPoint versus a board in the room. So whatever you can do to really further make that blossom for the jurors that are hearing it.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm like, this all is self-reinforcing, right? Because if you have a diverse team, if you have that diverse pool of people to pick from, it's not just going to be a check on your facts and making sure you don't make mistakes. You're going to be able to talk to your own people to understand, and you're not just doing it sort of artificially, outwardly. You have all those people on your team to just have those personal experiences to guide what you're doing. So,
exactly,
all around.
Exactly, yeah.
There's a certain intentionality, though, that you have to have in doing this. I think people who stand up in court think about maybe explicit bias, but think about, okay, I'm going to go, I have a strong Philadelphia accent. Okay. I am not the right person to go to court in Minnesota or in Georgia. We should have somebody who speaks like the juror speaks, and we'll have the same sorts of experiences. I mean, we think about that, I think, but I don't think we think about, okay, now my whole team, who's going to sit next to me at trial? How is that going to impact the jury? I think a lot of times we're thinking about who's going to sit next to me at trial, who is the best at writing briefs, who is the best at presenting witnesses, and I think it has to be viewed as a whole package, because the diversity affects 1 and 2, right? The way you write the brief or the way you present a witness, the effectiveness of that could be based on the diversity.
Right, and that just backs up to almost hiring practices,
right,
which again we could spend another hour or two on. But just to make sure that you have that sort of roster of people to call on, so that you can think, oh, I want to bring this person in because they're amazing at writing. Oh, advantage, they're also going to be adding diversity to the team. Again, skill set is so important, but then also looking at that larger picture. And are they going to check me on things? Are they going to look at things in a different way that potentially those jurors will ultimately consider as well?
And the tokenism point you said is so important, because we say, oh, okay, well, we have a woman in the firm, like, let's bring her. It's not that. It's bringing folks. It's bringing folks in from the beginning and having them be, really important parts of the case.
Joe, you read my mind, because I was like, I feel like we could do a whole other episode on making sure you have that pool. That's really the key. If you don't have it, you're not going to be able to create it down the line. So that's a huge step one.
Because ultimately when you get to court, there are certain things you can take into consideration. I mean, it's becoming so much more of an issue, and it is becoming much more of a topic of conversation. Judge Bennett out of the Iowa federal courts before he retired was one of the first to really start looking at this, actually having an instruction and having jurors sign something to say that they will take their implicit bias into consideration. Washington is also, they put together a short video for jurors to see to make implicit bias a topic that's not uncomfortable. So you almost can start questioning yourself, and that's great for when the jury has that, but it also means they're going to be looking out in the courtroom and expecting a little bit more of that diverse presentation, potentially as it becomes more of a topic of conversation.
And that, you talked a little bit, I guess, how things have started to change. Have we seen any other shifts, especially recently, given just all the global upheaval there's been with the pandemic and, other things? Is there anything else that we should be, thinking about, things that have changed?
I mean, I think it's, like you said, it's just been brought more into all of our own collective conscious. We've been paying attention to who is on our teams, who is on our jury, and we've been seeing, with the pandemic, there has been a heightened awareness of Asian hatred and we had a case in, I'll refrain from saying where everything is, but there was an expert on one side who was from Wuhan, China, and the judge agreed with the side's motion in limine to say, we can't talk about where this witness is from.
Because of potential biases that might come with that. And so even if we're not seeing a lot of direct comments, again, the difference between implicit and explicit bias of jurors in the courtroom, we're seeing the court itself and trial teams just having that heightened awareness of, do we need to take this into consideration?
And by the way, we've been talking about complaints and private litigation. A lot of our members also represent clients in front of government agencies, and it wouldn't be a terrible idea to take into account the implicit biases of the regulators.
Absolutely.
that are looking at it. I think probably less Dr. Strange wizard stuff with that, because we will know them and we kind of have a sense of where they're coming from. But again, you have to be intentional about this.
Right, and unless you really do have an idea of where that individual is coming from, all of those rules of communication efforts, of getting that diverse team in, all of the benefits of doing those things even apply in arbitration, in a bench trial, in talking to a compliance board. All of those things still apply, because it's maybe shocking, but they're people too, just like jurors are. And so when you are going into that presentation, having that awareness and that proactive behavior to help combat potential negative bias can really help.
Last question. We could go on all day, and I think we'd love to have you back. I'd love to have you back and cover some of these other topics. But let me ask you this one last question. Okay. I have just filed a complaint, or I've just been retained by a client to defend against a complaint that filed. I don't think it matters either way. Should I be thinking about implicit bias at that point? What steps should I be taking as I plan out strategically how I'm going to take this case through 4 years of discovery and class certification and all these different things? What should I be thinking about?
I think first and foremost, as we said, just look at who you could pull into the case to make sure that when you are even going through the process of brainstorming for what should be in the answer, having that diverse pool immediately in terms of who you're working with at that point, I think can be really, really helpful. And then as you get into the discovery process, are you talking to witnesses, obviously, first and foremost, those connected to the case, but are you talking to people from a diverse background? Are you getting information from potentially anyone who's available? So that then when you ultimately get to the point of trial, if you do get to the point of trial, you have those different resources to pull from, and you can incorporate that into a varied communication method, working with the judge in terms of what aspects or what motions in limine do we need to file so that there won't be issues that pop up in terms of witnesses and the like.
And then finally, working on that juror questionnaire, if you can get one. We've seen so many more judges being receptive to having a questionnaire, especially if you can show that it helps speed things along, but it can also help target or ferret out some of those biases, even just seeing how someone responds to it. Have you ever been involved in litigation? Yes, I had a female attorney. Well, you're going to know that that juror at least notes the gender of attorneys or witnesses, and it's something that's important to them, even if it's not a negative association.
Again, really interesting, really interesting stuff. I mean, I think my takeaway from this is, and I think the light bulb just went on a little bit, as I think about putting together a case, I always tell folks that I work with, listen, we have to think about it as if we're going to try the case. When we take the deposition, we should be creating a transcript that we can use for cross-examination at trial. We also should be thinking, when we create at the beginning of the case, we create our witness list, basically, by going out and talking to people. We should be having these implicit and explicit biases in mind. Yeah. As we think about, I mean, the witnesses are what they are. Certain cases, you don't have a choice. People know, but if you have a choice, you should be thinking about that.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, where can we, have more of a choice? Experts, right? Like, look at your expert team. Look at who you're interviewing to be experts. Are you, going back to the same people? Are you thinking outside of the box? Are there any kind of new experts you could bring in that might bring a different perspective? So there's so many considerations when it comes to biases and diversity.
And as you're pulling that trial team together, are you opening up the discussion? So often within our organizations, there's a hierarchy, and the maybe very junior associate's not going to feel comfortable calling a senior partner out on one thing or another. But having the leadership of those trial teams open it up to say, hey, listen, we want to make sure we put the best case forward. If you have questions, if you don't understand why we're taking a certain approach, please bring up your thoughts, and really opening that up to all members of the team can really help to tap into everyone's experience, everyone's background, so that ultimately when you're describing this to a jury, you're not going to have a juror say, I totally didn't understand that one aspect of the case. And the paralegal on the team's meanwhile sitting there thinking, yeah, I knew that was going to come up. But if they don't have that comfort level to bring it up with the team, you're really missing out on that diversity.
All right. Well, listen, like I said, we could go on all day. And thank you. We would love to have you back and continue to explore these issues. But I think our folks would like to learn a little bit more about you both. Maybe I can start off by asking, is there anything you would like to tell your younger self that you wish you knew when you were 22 or 25?
Oh, my gracious. Go ahead, Christina.
I guess the thing that I wish I would have understood is that networking, not just with the most senior people you can find, but networking all across your peer group as well. I had this assignment when I was a freshman at the Carlson School of Management at University of Minnesota, and they said, come up with 5 people you can network with. And I was like, okay, I know a VP at a bank. I know this person. And that's who I added. And the professor showed us, look, this guy just wrote 5 of his classmates. And this is what is important to know, that opportunities come from every level. And it's not just going to be some senior partner at a firm that you met at a cocktail hour once.
What's funny is sometimes your classmates become the general counsel of the client that can give you a little bit of work. So,
Completely.
That's great advice, Joe.
I would say never stop volunteering. I think volunteering and finding sort of those other areas in your life that just really bring you joy outside of what you're doing day to day adds an amazing variety and also keeps your faith in humanity.
Yeah, and I'll comment on that as well. It's funny, when we do pro bono work or we do, it actually creates, and it goes back to your point, it creates something to talk about. Right? Our clients our clients will say, oh, that's really interesting that you're interested in this particular area or that you're helping these folks. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. And by the way, it's also a great way to network.
Yeah, indeed. Get outside your comfort zone there too.
All right. Now a challenging question for you each. Tell us something interesting about yourself that we wouldn't know if we only met you as a jury consultant.
Well, we talked about this question ahead of time, and I said to Christina, I think one of the things that's interesting about us, both of us, is that we met in France. So we happened to be studying abroad many moons ago,
many years ago.
and made friends, and then I hired Christina as quickly as I could.
Just so we could keep hanging out.
we met in Lyon, France, and traveled around Europe together, and now we force each other to hang out with each other.
And now we travel all over the U.S. together.
So what were you doing in France?
Studying abroad. So I was in a law school program at the time, and she was in a business school program at the time. So we were both studying abroad in Lyon.
How was the cheese?
Amazing. I mean, Lyon is known for its food, so it was. We were not short of good meals there.
And now you're working with your good friends. So
Indeed.
What could be better?
Yeah.
All right, let's go to our final segment, the Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat.
So I would like to tell our listeners, this is the first podcast we've done in person in quite some time.
Yeah, it's exciting.
So I actually have an actual hat, and there are actual questions in the actual hat. And
they're color-coded.
And they're color-coded. Well, and I will give you the
Which
choice.
is intimidating.
So there's three options, and I'll give you the options. You could either choose big questions in antitrust. Do you think that there have been fewer multi-jurisdictional cartel cases brought in the last 5 years, and why? Antitrust trivia, or the cocktail icebreaker.
I think I'm going to go cocktail icebreaker.
For sure, cocktail icebreaker.
I would have chosen that one too.
All right, I'm mixing up the questions, and you can choose a question here, and you want to hand that to me? I'll read it to you. Okay.
Oh, jeez.
Are you a cat person or a dog person, or neither, and why?
I think I'm a fur person. So most
like a fur person, like the people who throw blood on, that kind of fur person.
No.
Okay.
Anything with fur, I love. But at the same time, I do have cats, and but I travel a lot, and so it's easier for me to have cats because I can leave for a day without making sure. And I do love cats.
I was about to take huge exception if you didn't say you were a cat person because you have 3.
But I do love dogs too.
Yeah. You have 3 cats. Do you live in a studio apartment?
Do not. Okay, thankfully, nope. There's a little bit more square footage for them to spread their litter.
Just checking.
Right. I am definitely a dog person. We have 2, and this morning my son actually FaceTimed me, and he was like, "When are we going to get another dog?" And I said, "We cannot have 3." It seems like a lot with 3 kids, also. So.
Yeah. We have a dog, and we purposely got a dog that wasn't very smart, because we were afraid that if we got a smart dog, he would just foil us all the time.
I think that's a valid fear. Yeah.
And that worked out for us because he's definitely not a very smart dog.
Yeah. I'm a neither person, but I don't like telling people that because she just gasped at me. That's the reaction I get. So I should just say I'm a dog person because I don't want people to think I'm a bad person.
I mean, if you really just want to check on your self-esteem, get a cat. I mean, they judge me every day.
So if you're neither a dog nor a cat, does that make you like a bird person? Or?
Well, we used to have fish that my husband's really into saltwater fish tanks. We used to have really cool fish. So I'm a fish person.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah. You're a scale person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, fur person, scale person. Okay, we will see you next time on Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.